So the story that I'm going to tell you guys is about a book, one of my favorite books. It's an anthology of Frank O'Hara poetry that I lost in a New York hostel in 2007 and found a year later under very interesting circumstances. Before I tell you that story, I want to tell you a little bit about how that book came into my life. See, I'm not the kind of person that goes out and buys poetry anthologies on a whim. I'm not cultured that way. The only reason that I got that book was because it was required reading on a syllabus for a course that I was taking at McGill called Modern American Poetry. I was in a cultural studies major there, and I ended up taking a lot of courses with the phrase modern American in it. Modern American history, modern American short story, etc. The reason for that was because I'd always had this dream about someday living in New York. And I've thought of these courses as training for my future life as a well-rounded, cultured American. So this book was also one of the first books that I kept off my college syllabus. What I would normally do in college was get the books, photocopy the relevant passages, and then return the books for a full refund, saving a little bit of money along the way. But I thought that for some reason, this time, I really, really needed to keep the books. It was 2007, and I was having a great year. I had recently broken up with my long-term boyfriend, and for the first time in my life, I was really starting to enjoy that college social experience. I'd also recently hooked up with a moderately well-known Midwestern indie rapper, Atmosphere, who gave me this really weird 3-year project to be somebody. In retrospect, I'm sure he meant nothing of it. He just wanted me to leave him alone for a few years. But at the time, I thought that what he meant by that was that if I worked really, really hard for a couple of years, then I would get to date him. It's not funny. I had a fantasy about us someday having an apartment in the Lower East Side where the models and musicians live. He was going to be the musician, and I was going to be the model, since I had done some modeling in college, but I was going to be more than a model. I was going to be a successful journalist and filmmaker. So that year, I worked my ass off to make this happen. I started a filmmakers club at McGill. I worked as a production assistant on music video shoots, sometimes working for 24 hours straight, working overnights. I slept for about 3 hours a night. I went down to 115 pounds, not because I was trying to diet, but because I merely did not have time to eat. So that summer, after I had completed my Modern American Poetry course, I decided that I was going to make a big step in my career, whereby I was going to get an editorial internship at a New York magazine. I had a friend in New York, a Columbia student at the time, who the summer before had completed an internship at the Elle magazine in Brooklyn, New York City, not to be confused with the ELLE magazine, who had a great time there, and I asked her if I could use her name in my pitch to them. Sure enough, I did, and I was offered an internship there on that basis. I did not have the money to rent an apartment in New York, so what I ended up doing was I ended up hooking myself up with a hostel that I'd stayed in previously that would give me free rent in the Upper West Side in exchange for working the desk there several nights a week. When I told my co-workers this at the magazine, they thought that it was adventurous, and writerly, and that this sort of plan exerted the exact type of gumption that one needed to make it in the big city. I left for New York full of hope, listening to Tom Waits on the train ride there. I brought along my anthology of Frank O'Hara poems because I thought that it displayed the quintessential New Yorkerness, that I was trying to cultivate. The loving descriptions of the landmarks and people in 1970s New York was exactly the kind of world that I was hoping to discover for myself. However, even as I was leaving for New York, I noticed something wrong with me. I didn't know it at the time, but I was suffering from that horrible disease, depression, and I was about to go through my first depressive episode. I noticed my social skills depleting as I got there. I found myself having a really hard time relating to my coworkers. New Yorkers were, in a word, busy. Even the paid staff at the magazine often had 2 or 3 jobs, taking on babysitting gigs and working retail on the weekends. The other interns that I worked with went to Harvard and Notre Dame. Their parents had condos in the Upper East Side, or they had these fabulous Williamsburg sublets that were somehow paid for. They just seemed so much more confident and writerly than I was able to be. My friend who had mentioned earlier, a student at Columbia, was by this time a sort of hipster gal about town who was really great about taking me to shows and other social outings. My very first night in New York, I went to a show on the Lower East Side. We went to see a band, and one of the guys in the band yelled at me for fucking over his friend, as I maintained that he had literally gotten the wrong person and I'd only just arrived there the night before. So that was my experience. I was having a horrible time. Eventually, I broke down. I called my mom, and I told her that I was just unable to fit in the city. She said, "That's how you feel. You're always more than welcome to come home." So that is what I did. I made up some lame excuse about losing my passport to the staff at the magazine. I didn't even tell the staff at the hostel that I was leaving. I packed my bags up in the middle of the night, forgetting half my shit, including my Frank O'Hara anthology, and I left to go back to Canada. Went back to Canada, got back together with my ex-boyfriend, moved back in with my parents, got a job in a coffee shop that I hated. I felt my mental state depleting. I told my parents that I didn't think I was going to be able to make it through the semester next year. However, as a family, we'd had no prior experience with mental illness. They thought that I was just being a slacker, and they told me that I must go back to school. I went back to school. As the semester progressed, I found myself having less and less time in school and more time in bed. On my 21st birthday, my boyfriend suggested that we could do anything we wanted that day since it was my birthday, and I admitted to him that more than anything, I would really like to stay in bed that day. Every social outing felt like a major chore. Finally, come October, I realized that I could not go on in this way, and I decided to seek treatment for my condition. I had a friend who had sought treatment for depression the year before. She had been prescribed an antidepressant, and she was able to get better on it. So I got the number of a psychiatrist from her, who me and my boyfriend lovingly referred to as Dr. Pill Pop. From then on, based on his propensity to overprescribe medication. Went to him, told him what happened as best as I could. He said that it did indeed seem like a depressive episode, and he prescribed me Celexa, the exact same antidepressant that had helped my friend a year before. It was a few weeks into taking this medication, and I did not find myself being any different than I was before. If anything, I was spending even more time in bed. I told my doctor this. He said that this is probably because it was a very low dose and what I needed was a higher dose. So I took that higher dose, saw no change, stopped taking that higher dose, took it again a few days later at a double dose, stopped it, and so on and so forth. As this happened, I was getting a little bit more energy. I saw some marked differences. I decided I was going to spend a little bit more time on self-care. I got myself a trendy new haircut. I bought myself some clothes with the money that I've saved up from those days that I didn't even have the energy to get out of bed, let alone go shopping. My boyfriend and I booked tickets to Austin, Texas over the Christmas break. Went there. I had a really great time shopping and modeling. He did not so much have a great time. He accused me of not spending enough time with him, and he broke up with me. Ended up seeing somebody else, a local electro DJ and hardcore music enthusiast. I was very smitten with him at the time, and I kept thinking of ways to spend more time with him. His mind always seemed to be very occupied by musical endeavors. And at a point, he told me that I had a cool voice and should perhaps consider being a hip-hop MC since he knew that I loved hip-hop culture. I took this like a fish to water. I suggested that we start a band where he would be the DJ and I would be the MC. I ended up filling up rhyme books, skipped school to hang out in coffee shops and write songs. I thought that my breakthrough as a female rapper was just around the corner. People had noticed a change in my behavior, sometimes accusing me of being on drugs, even though I was not. I didn't at the time link the state as a possible side effect to the high dosage of antidepressants that I was taking, but I was definitely acting more confident. It felt like I was meeting all the right people. I went to a dinner party with a photographer friend of mine who ended up introducing me to a sound engineer who recorded some of my first songs. I really pressured my boyfriend at the time to give me some beats, even though he couldn't because he was so busy with his day job as a film editor in addition to his music stuff. Finally, he broke up with me. My family was not thrilled with my new behavior. My friends were turning their backs on me, and suddenly I felt myself becoming less accepted in my communities in Toronto and Montreal. Once again, I thought of New York as a possible place to live. Thought I was gonna go there for a weekend. I ended up staying for more than 3 months. In New York, everything was different. I was still living at a hostels, but I didn't have anything to do during the day, so I ended up just wandering the streets, meeting people, shopping. People picked up on my energy right away. I ended up meeting artists who invited me back to their studios to critique their art, automatically taking me for one of their own. I even spent a night in the back room of the Chelsea Hotel, chain smoking and talking about art with the night clerk there. I even spent a night in New York holding cells after I got arrested trying to dash and dine at a fancy hotel. I met a boy in Jackson Square Park who I bumped a cigarette off of, and I moved out of his loft 2 weeks later. The day that he got arrested, I had my arms around his hips as he was getting handcuffed. He was the hottest guy that I've ever hooked up with, and I thought that if I ever stopped touching him, he would disintegrate or float away. He gave me $500, his rent money, to hold on to, and I didn't want to go back to his roommate to explain that he had gotten arrested, which I felt was my fault. I also didn't want to spend the night wandering around the streets with $500 on me, afraid that I'd get robbed. So I went to a friend of mine and gave him the money for safekeeping. I went to get something to eat and immediately forgot where my friend lived, what the name of his street was, or what his doorway looked like. I didn't have a phone number for him, so I knew that that money was gone. As soon as the guy found out the next morning, he refused to touch me after that. After a hot and heavy session, a hostile shower, which to this day remains one of the most electric and exciting sexual experiences of my life. I called him a few days later from a Brooklyn pizza parlor, admitting that I had no idea where I was. I had not slept or showered in several days, and I desperately needed him to come get me. Dutifully, he did. He let me stay at his loft for a few more nights, but made it very clear that he did not want to see me until I had his money. So, I was broke and homeless in New York with only my wit to rely on. I slept in the subway. I slept in the NYU student lounge. I slept in the hallway of my friend's apartment when I noticed that she had put a couch out in her hallway, as college students often do. She later explained to me it was because the couch had bed bugs and they had sprayed it down with a chemical, which is why the couch was in the hallway. At that point, I did not admit to her that I'd slept on it that night, but I sure did. Finally, I wandered back to the hostel that I stayed in the summer before, and I pleaded with them to please, please, please let me stay there for a few nights. To my surprise, they did indeed put me up in the common room upstairs free of charge. The common room was much nicer than any of the dorm rooms. It had a pull-out couch, which I slept on, and a beautiful patio and a view of the Manhattan skyline. My first night there, I woke up, I looked at the skyline, and I realized that despite everything, all the horrible things that had happened to me, I was still having the time of my life and living my dreams. I looked to the bookshelf beside my couch, and there it was, my Frank O'Hara anthology with my handwritten notes still in the margins. Thank you so much.